Good morning, beautiful children, and welcome to another day at the Birchbark House by Louise Erdrich. Yesterday, when we were reading, we read two chapters, and the first one was called Fishtail's Pipe, and it was about Father. Father has two friends, a man named Fishtail and another Frenchman, and they all were sitting around smoking a pipe and talking about how the white people were wanting to take more and more of their land. And then the second chapter was called Pinch, and it was about how Pinch got in. His mother wanted him to watch over berries so the birds wouldn't eat them in the sun while they dried, and he ate them all. And how Mother kind of thought it was the crow at first and scared the crow away. And then how in the end of the chapter we find that they all, Mother and the children all and grandmother got into the canoe and went down the river and were helping other families rice. It's ricing time of year. It's the fall, and they were collecting rice, and so they all had a little bit of a celebration. So now, the new chapter today is called The Move. Remember that these Native Americans, build their little wigwams in the summer, but then they also move back into either a longhouse during the winter. And in this case, because Father is half French and half Native American, I do believe they live in a little log cabin. So let us read to find out what's going on. The Move. Father left on his voyage, and the rest of the family worked hard to prepare as much food as possible for the winter. For the days, the girls dried and then parched the corn that they saved from those hungry birds. Around and around they stirred the corn in an iron kettle over a low fire. Grandmother went over to Tallow's place and pounded some of the corn to meal with a hollowed log and a great round stick that Tallow kept in her yard. And while Nokomis, which is grandmother, worked on the corn, Tallow gutted fish and dried them on a big scaffold that she set over a special fire. And she would feed day and night with cedar wood to give the fish a special flavor. The charcoal from the cedar that she would keep to mix with pine pitch is what she used to smoke the fish, mixed together with stuff from caulking for the seams of their canoes. Now, at the winter cabin, Father had built a rough lean-to and attached it alongside a northern wall. Inside the log lean-to, he had dug a deep, round hole. Angeline and Mamma spent one morning lining the earth of the hole with birch bark. They had a tight bark container like a big bin, and they lined the container with bunches of dried grass. Then they took more curved pieces of birch bark and set them in the interior. This was for their food. Within that area, Mamma first placed several packs of dried smoked fish and venison, all tied carefully together with 2 layers of bark. When those packs were set neatly down on the bottom, she told Okomias to fetch the parched corn, which she had stored in neat skin bags. There were several bags of wild rice from the fall's gathering. Though the harvest had been poor, they did have some rice. Mamma had used the intestines of the moose to store the pounded meat and dried berries that they would have on the feast days as a treat. She set those very carefully to one side, surrounded by bark. Deep, deep in the food, unseen to anyone but Okomias, Mamma had set 8 birchbark cones of maple sugar. These, Okomias knew, were for the hardest times in winter, when they would need sweetness to survive in spirit, as well as food to keep them strong. And when all was finished, Nokomias, grandmother, came to bless the food. And in the deep light of the fading afternoon, Grandma raised her arms the way she did at sunrise near the water. Everything grew silent around her. Even Pinch stopped shuffling his feet and rubbing his nose. Outside, the birds hushed, the sky bent to listen, and the wind died down. Golden leaves hung balanced in the air. It was as though, Okomias thought, All of creation was interested in what Grandma was going to say. Even her own heartbeat was quieter, and that excited, jumpy feeling in her calmed down. Whenever Grandma prayed, she made the world around her feel protected, safe, and eternal. Now Grandma bent over and looked very carefully at the food to make certain that it was properly packed. Ah, she breathed quietly, standing again, holding in her palm a tiny mound of tobacco. She looked down at the tobacco, touched it lovingly, and asked the spirits for protection against the cold. She spoke to the Creator. "We are very small," she said, "just human. Help us live through this winter. Come to us, especially during the harvest moon, the crust on the snow moon, when so often meat is scarce, when the ice is too thick to catch many fish, when disease um, breaks us. Oh, the hungry one comes. He comes stalking from house to house. Oh, oh, great one above, O great one above, please watch over us." Her voice was soft but deep and troubled. Stillness swirled about the little cabin when she finished. It was as though everyone's heart was touched a little by the coming cold, and though a shadow of the wind of the coming winter came sweeping across their minds, Okomias shivered. Angeline touched her shoulder. Mamma stroked Pinch's rough, hay-like stack of hair. Baby Niwu was the first to make a sound, and that sound was a sudden cry. They spent the last night in the Birchbark house, chilled in their robes and blankets. Already Okomias missed the summer. When morning came, Mamma hardly had the fire going before they all began to pack. Mamma stirred the soup in the kettle, heated it through, and brought some to Grandma in the tin bowl with the trader's spoon. Grandma drank it all up, stretched her arms, hopped to her feet with a young girl's agility. She rubbed her hands. She loved moving and packing, changing locations. And before the sun even popped its rays through the lowest brush, she was carefully rolling up the rush mats that she had woven. And from the inside walls of the house, she lifted down her careful bundles of roots, her bags of berries and dried, crumpled leaves, and long curls of inner bark of certain trees. And for the first time, Okomias noticed all these little bundles, how cleverly they were tied, how interesting each one smelled, their colors, their odd shriveled shapes. She helped her grandmother take the bundles down and put them carefully into her net to carry. "I'll take them," she said. Her arms were full. "We'll go together," said Grandmother, watching with interest as Okomias touched a particular root, sniffed a tiny packet, and sneezed, rubbed a powder with her finger. Are they talking to you?" Grandmother asked, curious, as they walked along the trail soon after. "Do you hear their voices?" "No," said Okomias, startled. "I don't hear anything." And now after a little while they walked the trail. As the medicines grew heavy, she thought to ask, "Grandma, do they talk to you?" She nodded. "Yes, sometimes they tell me things, but of course I have learned how to listen." "What do they tell you?" "Well, they tell you how to use them when someone is sick, where to find them, how to prepare them right, just the right strength. I wondered if they had picked you to talk to you, my granddaughter. I've been watching how quiet you are sometimes. Your mamma told me about the bear cubs in the woods." "Oh, they talk to me," Okomias said, laughing a little at the memory of their peculiar, sleepy, stubborn looks. So little Pinch, when he did, okay, let me try that again. Sorry, guys. "Oh, they talk to me," Okomias said, laughing a little at the memory of the peculiar, sleepy, stubborn looks at the mother, so like Pinch when he didn't want to go to bed. "Listen to them," Nokomias said as she stopped in the path. Holding her bundles in her arms, she gazed at Okomias until, understanding the gravity of her grandmother's nature, Okomias stood still. Holding the medicines and looking curiously at her grandmother, she waited. "Listen to them," was all Grandmother said, touching Okomias's face. She spoke so earnestly and with such emotion in her voice that Okomias was always to remember that moment, the bend in the path where they stood with the medicines, her grandmother's kind face, and the words that she spoke. Now, by the end of the day, the cabin was once again their home. Niwu slept in his winter bed, a blanket fixed to the ropes so that he could gently rock to sleep. Mamma had a fire going in the fire pit, a small hearth that father had made for them of the smoothest, thickest, heaviest stones. Okomias was always glad to see that hearth once the fire was lighted, for she spent many cold nights huddled near it in blankets, listening to Grandma and gazing so long at the patterns in the lake rocks that she saw things, faces, animals, and had come to know them as familiar. That night in their cabin, it was at first too warm to cuddle in the blankets, so she sat on the mat on the earth floor and watched the flames grow shadows leaping across the stones. There, a long-legged racing dog, a face of an old woman, a raccoon's face, a frog, Omakaya's namesake. She greeted them drowsily, old friends, and fell asleep against her grandmother. Halfway through the night, Omakayas woke, freezing. She patted around the floor until she found her blanket, and then she snuggled quickly in, for the cold had crept in with iron stealthiness into the cabin. Dark air stabbed at them from all along the edges of the sleeping mats. It seized at their shoulders, their feet even, and their hair, even the hair on the top of Okomias's head and the tip of her nose. She buried her face in the fur of her blanket, nestled close against her grandmother's back. As she fell asleep, it seemed to her that there was something odd in the ferocity of the winter, of the cold, that continued to deepen as the night went on. She never quite warmed, kept shifting as cold draughts seized a foot or iced her knees. All night she woke, slept again, woke again, and it took until darkness lighted before she felt warm enough to drop into a heavy dream. And the next chapter, my friends, so they have moved into their cabin. Um, and it sounds like it is some sort of a cabin-like, right? And they packed all their food in there. Grandma blessed the little house, and they're all there now. So the next chapter is called First Snow. Think about this. Do you remember the first time it snowed this year? Always the first snow seems to be special. So let's see what happens with our friends. First snow. Now the air in the cabin was brilliant. There was a flash to the light that told her that it snowed while she slept. It was the first snow. Ah! Pinch screamed, throwing off his rabbit-skin blanket to run outside. Don't slide on the lake yet! Mama knew what he was up to and raced to the door after him to stop him from running straight out onto the ice. And although the cold was sudden and the snow had fallen thick and mysterious overnight, the water of the lake was still open, just past a skim of delicate ice on shore. Already the pair was warming up a little. At least where the sun shone the brightest. Mamma was worried that father would not manage to make the crossing before the freeze up of the lake. If he couldn't, he would have to wait in camp until the ice was solid and he and his men could pull their toboggans of stretched furs across to sell to the traders. Down the cleared path now, striding large, feather nodding in front with each long step, came old Tallow. She held her long rifle loosely under one arm and growled at Okomias as she trampled into the bush. Okomias called back, and old Tallow's hand went up in an abrupt wave, though she didn't turn to look, or certainly to smile. Her dogs followed at her heels, great and wolfish looking. The slinking yellow dog paused to turn and bare his teeth, brown teeth, at Omachias, but she crossed her eyes at him and couldn't have cared less. First snow day always lifted her out of her skin. made her feel sharp and alive. The snow, not deep, softening, gleamed. The, the snow, not deep, softening, gleamed in a white cover all over all that she could see, and each branch was neatly outlined, and some still bore some their leaves. Omachias and Angeline admired the intricate way that the snow trimmed the dried reeds of cattails, and the brown furry heads were capped with tiny white mounds that made them look delicious, delicious. Angeline pretended to bite one. Take this. Not only was Pinch annoying, but he had good aim. Take this. Just as Okomias turned, she caught a firm-packed snowball at the side of the face. The snow stung. Pinch had packed a little stone in it. Ow! The wet snow licked her neck. Omachias ran at him without a word and threw herself on him, buried him face first in a mound of snow directly beside the path. Ow! Pinch howled and leaped up, mad, packed more snowballs together, and set off after his laughing sisters. The more he ran on his short legs, though the faster they galloped ahead. There was not a chance that he would ever catch those girls, and he knew it, and he finally stopped. He slumped down near the side of the path, muttering to himself, and putting more snowballs together until he had a big pile. At the heart of each he packed a stone. Stones, he hoped, would sting his sisters until they cried. Now the girls walked farther into town, knowing Mamma was busy, hoping that she wouldn't miss them quite yet. It was exciting to live around other people again, and both of the girls wanted to find out if old friends had stayed to winter. They wanted to see if any new families had come to live nearby. Angeline was thinking of going to the Catholic mission school, and she wanted to sneak by and see if anybody was there yet. Studying the signs and the marks that the priest made with the soft white stick on the big black wall, they walked to the edge of the schoolyard and then stood outside in the clear air, in the sun, breathing the fragrance of the fresh, wet snow and the new bread, crusty and warm. Now the sing-song reciting voices floated from inside that long schoolhouse. Omachias was glad that they were outside, and Angeline's face was turned eagerly toward the sound of the priest's instructions. She was curious to know what was happening, but remembered Grandma's advice. Take their ways if you need them, she said, but don't forget your own. You are an Ashinwambi. Your mother and your grandmother are Wolf Clan people. Don't forget. And you sweat bath yourself clean every day. Even jump in the freezing lake, a thing that the white people do not do. My girl, do not be like the white people. And just as the thought of Grandma made Okomias smile, there was a flurry of stamping feet as children of all ages burst from the back door, leaping wide, flinging themselves forward in laughing frenzy, thrilled ways with the prospect of a new snow, and ready to have their morning break, their fun, and then the small meal of smoked whitefish and bread. Ah, Angeline pointed with amazement, stepping with easy care down the stairs of the schoolhouse, solemn, carrying his tobacco pouch, his knife at his belt, and none other than Fishtail. It was Fishtail coming out of the school. What was he doing in school? He did not join the children in their wild play, but he walked directly from the school toward the camp. Fishtail lived at the very edge of the village, hidden in a deep bush. His place was built the old way. It was a birch-bark house, but it was quite warm in winter, because he knew how to heap the sides with snow, and he was an excellent trapper. The interior of his house was always lined with strung skins, hung with lush furs, made up into sleeping robes, and red and white point blankets. His wife, Angeline's best friend, Ten Snow, was known as a fine bead worker. People said that she tanned hides so soft that they felt to the skin like the slippery velvet that the traders had sold them. Let's find out what he's doing, whispered Angeline. He's visiting the school, said Omachias. What's there to find out? I don't know, Angeline said, and she pointed to the book um, and paper in his hands, the evidence in Fishtail's hand that he had another motive in attending school and not just visiting. Okay, said Omachias, now curious. You go ask. Ah, Angeline blushed. Scared? No, I'm not scared to ask him. Yes, you are. Challenged, Angeline jumped forward. She walked so swiftly after Fishtail that Omachias ran to keep up with her. But when she got to him, she walked beside him with no word. Didn't she know what to say? Omachias trotted behind, just within earshot. What were you doing back there? Angeline finally had the courage to ask. I went to the preschool to learn to read like the white people. That way they can't cheat us with their treaties. Remember, children, how they talked in an article we read about how the um, the white people often cheated the natives by saying they had something written down. Sounds like that. This is what he doesn't want to happen to him. Now, surprised and taken aback by this, Angeline and Omachias could only stand still and watch him as he walked swiftly, gracefully back into his home. They turned to go, still thoughtful. The sun was warm as summer, and by the time they returned, all the snow had melted in the heat. They took the same path back that they had taken before, and as they neared the cabin, all of a sudden Omachias felt a wet slap and a sharp stinging blow to the back of her head. Ugh! It was Pinch, dancing with gleeful anger, foot to foot, his snowballs so watery only the pebbles were at the center left, and they made a pile around his feet. He, nevertheless, insisted on revenge. I said I'd get you, and I got you, he yelled. I'm the warrior Big Pinch. Now, not long after that first bright snow, another snow fell, grayer and heavier. The ice came in. The water had a transparent skim that broke apart and clicked together, then went solid again until there formed a tough gray coat of ice. Father Shirley had stopped to camp and to wait until the ice was thick before moving on. It snowed steadily and long, 3 whole days of snow. And while the snow fell outside, Angeline's friend, Ten Snow, used the red cloth that Father had bought last summer as trim for a blue trade coat dress. And let me read that again, guys. While the snow fell outside, Angeline's friend, Ten Snow, used the red cloth that Father had bought last summer as trim for a blue trade cloth dress that she and Angeline were making. It was a ribbon-trimmed dress, graceful. Mamma had trimmed a matching shawl with thimbles so that when she walked, Angeline jingled softly and enticingly. Now, every so often now, she was allowed to visit Auntie Muskrat's house. That was the only place that she was allowed to visit alone, for Auntie Muskrat kept strict eye on her. Any young man who visited would have to stand or sit outside on Auntie's long bench while Angeline stayed, dancing foot to foot inside the cabin, craning out of the windows and laughing. So craning out means she was looking out the windows. Now the snow fell deeper yet, and in its grip old Tallow had the best of luck. On the last day it snowed, she dragged from the farthest end of the island 2 plump beavers. Their furs were thick and would fetch a good price. She roped the beavers into a little sled, tied on another rope that circled her waist. Happily, she brought the meat to Mamma and Grandma to prepare. She stayed in the yard, smoking her little pipe, while they made a fire outside to roast the meat over the coals. And although snow had fallen, Omachias thought it couldn't truly be winter until old Tallow put on her remarkable coat. Now every year the children watched to see that coat emerge, a big, shaggy coat, and it was always different, sewed with new furs, patched with discarded calico cloth, and even velvets. Old Tallow would wear it until the earliest days of spring, but now, even though the cold already bit in the mornings, she wore only her earth-colored dress with the ravelled hem. She even looked a little too warm as she bent near the fire, pulling a burning stick into the out to relight the new wad of tobacco in her pipe. She leaned back, adjusting her hat, and stared long at Omachias. Now Omachias looked into the fire. It was her job to keep smoothing and arranging the coals into an even bed for baking the meat. But old Tallow's eyes on her back made her itch. Whenever old Tallow looked at her like that, she could feel those fierce eyes resting on her skin. There was something peculiar in old Tallow's look, something different from the way she looked at every other human. It was something familiar, though, and this time, as Okomias glanced back and caught a corner, just a little shred of that look, she suddenly understood. Old Tallow was looking at her the same way she looked at her dogs. Now this was not a bad thing. In fact, it was a good thing in a way, for old Tallow's look there, for in old Tallow's look there was true affection, something she didn't feel for other humans. It made Omachias feel both strange and safe inside. She smiled to herself, and had the odd, sudden, curious knowledge that, if it ever came to that, old Tallow would protect her. She would protect Omachias with her life. She didn't know why she knew that, but she just knew. Now, soon Grandma came out and took over, poking the coals this way and that to evenly set them. Soon she would burn a fine crust onto the skin of the beaver. Beaver was Father's favorite meat. He loved the burnt flavor of its fat, and Mama cooked it in a special way, and as soon as the meat singed and slightly was burnt, she cleaned the beavers, washed their carcasses, and salted water and stuffed them with corn and potatoes. She then sewed shut and roasted them slowly in a big iron kettle. They sizzled in their own fat, and the acorns burned black. And when the beavers were tender and completely cooked all the way through, she removed them, undid the meat from the bones, mixed the stuffing with the fried acorns, and cooked it all together in a soup once again. Now the aroma that old Tallow that aroma had old Tallow pacing back and forth hungrily. She looked eager at her dogs, and when Mamma ladled the soup into her bowl, she bent to it with a savage will, eating swiftly. Old Tallow put away one bowl and then another, while Mamma was dishing up the rest of the meal. It was lucky that we ate so quickly, though, to put away so much, for just as Pinch was wiping bread across the bottom of his bowl and opening his mouth to ask for more, there was a stamping and a shouting outside. The dogs barked, then stopped when a familiar voice shouted. It was Father, and he had come home. And as if summoned across the new ice by his favorite dish, he arrived in time to eat until he could eat no more. Now that night the children went upstairs and slept in the loft, and Grandmother slept there too, instead of downstairs beside Mamma and Papa. Father made his bed at the farthest end of the loft, where it was coolest. She put her old rabbit skin blanket down and slept on top of it. See, I misread that. Grandma made her bed at the farthest end of the loft, where it was coolest. She put her old rabbit skin blanket down and slept on top of it. I sleep hot, she explained to the children. They didn't like to tell her, but she also slept noisily. Grandma snored and often talked in her sleep, calling out to people from long, long ago. That night, Oma Caius woke in the dark and listened to her grandmother's soft, regular breathing. And then she heard her murmur, half understandable, sometimes arguing, sometimes pleasant, as she dreamed old times and went visiting to places that only she remembered. And that, my children, is the end of that chapter. And now we start a new portion of the book called Winter. And I will have a new chapter for um, every day next week. And I think we'll be able to finish this story. So now we realize that in the spring they're always seeming to be gathering food for the winter, right? They're gathering fish. They're growing the corn and gathering the corn, and they're keeping the supply, keeping a great supply for the winter, right? And then in the fall they go and they rice, and they hope to get a good amount of rice to help them through the winter. But unfortunately, they didn't this year, but they still had some. So now they're all in their own little house, and they've had the first snow, which was quite fun. And everyone is ready for the winter. And it is now the next chapter is called Baiboon, which means winter in native language. And the first chapter is going to be the blue ferns, and we will start that on Monday morning. You will be able to access that chapter. All right, my sweet children, how cold it must be to live in a little tiny house the way they have it. It must be cold. Um, Makes me think about nights when I'm camping and it's chilly out at night. All right. Well, have a wonderful day. And happy Friday. I love you all. I'll talk to you soon.